wanted to bring in Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk because this story, I think the more we find out about it, you're kind of left saying, I don't even know. I don't know what I know anymore. I know more information. Now it makes it even more confusing.
I agree with you. It's impossible to put the pieces into any real context. And, part of the problem, Dan, in our society nowadays, we reach our opinions based on the initial information, and we go into our respective corners, and we process all further information as to whether or not it meshes with what we already believe.
Yep.
So there'll be stuff we ignore because it doesn't fit with what we think happened. There'll be stuff that we lock onto because we think it's significant, and the entire picture doesn't get painted for months, and by the time it does, nobody cares anymore.
Richie Incognito, everybody stood up for him yesterday, which made me realize what Jonathan Martin was probably pointing out is everybody in that locker room was against him because everybody did side with Richie Incognito. Great teammate. Yeah, he pushes it a little too far. He's an honorary brother. He's all these things. Not one guy said, I feel for Jonathan Martin, or I could tell that this affected him, or let's not forget that he did leave this team in a great job. He was starting here, and he's left money on the table. I don't know if he'll ever play again. So why was that everybody stood up for Incognito and no one stood up for Jonathan Martin?
Well, that shows the atmosphere. And it wasn't just Incognito that Martin's people pointed to when they gave the information to the Dolphins on Sunday, and the Dolphins then promptly suspended Incognito. It was Incognito plus a culture, a locker room-wide culture that made it uncomfortable for Martin to the point where he ultimately decided he couldn't stay there. So it's not surprising, and I think, if anything, the reaction from the players demonstrates why Martin believed, whether he's right or wrong, but Martin believed his only alternative was to take it to the team, that trying to deal with it in-house wasn't going to get him anywhere because when push comes to shove, the players were going to line up in support of Incognito.
I'd like to hear the voice message that's left, just to be fair, in the context in which Incognito left it. Now, is he joking, laughing sort of when he's saying these things where what he's calling Martin, what he's going to do to his mother, what he's going to do to him physically? Because at the end, now we're told, Incognito says, all right, call me back. You don't leave a threatening message and then say, hey, call me back.
And that's a great point, Dan. I know people who will call me and leave voice messages that if someone saw the transcript, they would be shocked. And I know the spirit of it, and I know that it's a joke, and I know that it's aimed to get a rise out of me, and I don't have a problem with it. But you got to know your audience. And whether Incognito just didn't see that this was bothering Martin, I mean, maybe Martin just dealt with it as long as he possibly could and got to the point where he couldn't deal with it anymore. And you raised a very important point that's overlooked all the time, and it's stigmatized, the concept of mental illness, that Martin isn't reacting ultimately to these things the way that a healthy person would. That could be a big part of this. But I agree with you. I'd want to hear the whole thing, and I'd want to hear other voice messages, and I'd want to know more about their relationship and whether Incognito was in a position where he thought that this was fine and there was nothing that was bothering Martin until it was too late to fix it.
He's Mike Florio from ProFootballTalk.com, and you can see him on Sunday Night Football as well. You had a post here this morning that the GM of the Dolphins, Jeff Ireland, suggested that Jonathan Martin confront Incognito physically. This coming from Martin's agent, who said Ireland told him this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm told that at some point before Martin left the team, Martin's agent, Rick Smith, contacted Jeff Ireland to complain about the manner in which Incognito was treating Martin, and Ireland's suggested approach was physically confront Incognito and specifically punch him if that's what it takes to fix this. And Ireland's general message was, I don't know why this is a big deal. And that speaks to the deeper culture that we've been debating all week as to whether it's ever okay in any workplace setting, locker room or an office, to physically confront someone who is harassing you. And I can regardless of Martin's motivations, whatever, what he did is far better than starting a fight in the locker room with Richie Incognito. Regardless of who wins that fight, it can escalate, and it's just not the way conflict should be resolved. But when you've got the GM of the team saying that's what you should do, another example of the culture that Martin was dealing with.
Before I let you go, you were saying that maybe the Packers would go pick up a quarterback, and they're going to stay with Seneca Wallace. Is that the case? Why is that?
Well, because Seneca Wallace is the best of a bunch of bad options they have. I mean, all due respect to Seneca Wallace, i.e., here comes the insult. The guy was available in early September for a reason. And now it's Seneca Wallace and Scott Tolzien, two guys who haven't been in the Packers system. This is the important. You have a franchise quarterback. You draft a quarterback somewhere between round 3 and 6. You groom him. You develop him. You keep him around in case you need him. That's why the Patriots have Ryan Mallett. That's why the Broncos have Brock Osweiler. You can't just hope to find a guy off the street who's going to step in if your franchise quarterback goes down.
Wait, what happened to Matt Flynn?
Well, I don't know. For whatever reason, they're not interested in Matt Flynn. The guy who threw for 480 yards less than 2 years ago for the Packers, they're not interested, which maybe tells us more about not that we didn't need to know anything about Matt Flynn, given that, he got dumped by the Seahawks and dumped by the Raiders and dumped by the Bills, but maybe the Packers got out of the Matt Flynn business at the right time.
Well, maybe they realized that he has a dead arm, and people have been quietly talking about that. And maybe
is that important, though? Is that
as a quarterback?
Is that wrong?
I'm just thinking about this before I let you go. You're a lawyer. If I said I wanted you to defend Richie Incognito, how would you go about defending him right now?
I would sit Richie Incognito down, and I would say, I want to know the whole story about this idea that you were told to toughen up Jonathan Martin, and how much of what you did was a product of what you believed you were supposed to do, and also how much did the coaches know about how you were going about doing it. I think the only way you can effectively defend Richie Incognito right now, other than attacking Jonathan Martin, I mean, that's one way to do it, and that happens all the time when these things come up. You attack the person who's making the complaints. Short of attacking Martin, I'd want to know, from Incognito's perspective, was he doing what he was told, and were the coaches in position to know what he was doing?
Good to visit with you. Thanks for joining us. Short notice, Mike.
All right, see you, buddy.
Mike Florio, ProFootballTalk.com.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.